All right, so I had to read this first chapter of John Hersey's Hiroshima. Okay, so we're going to talk about that for a minute. Now, let's picture Beaver Cleaver's mom and dad. Here they are, and it's pre-Beaver years, right? Like, Beaver's not born yet. Like, Mr. Cleaver's just come back from the war. They just gotten married, and, you know, they haven't bought the house yet. They're living in an apartment in town, and they're going out for a nice afternoon, and they pick up the New Yorker. It's August 31st, 1946. It's about a year after VJ Day, right? All the celebrations and the euphoria. It's now been a year that Mr. Cleaver has had to readjust himself to life in America. And he and the wife go down to the park, and they're going to read this New Yorker magazine together. On the cover is this nice, beautiful picture of people at a picnic, okay? Actually, it's really not beautiful, but it's, I don't know what, it's optimistic, okay. And then they open it, and boom, what do they find? Bombs. Everything is about bombs in this period, right? Like baby booming, bombs, and like Japan blowing up, and the economy blowing up. Everything is boom, blowing up. Okay, but it's a shock, right? Because it's this piece that is describing what the atomic explosion was like in Japan from the perspective of the victims. And there had not been a piece like this written before that really brought on a human level, the cost of the bomb for the people of Japan, right? The price they had to pay for the war ending and the rebuilding of American prosperity in the American economy after the war, okay? And for instance, right after the bomb goes off in August of 1945, about 75% of Americans are fully in support of it, right? They say, look, we'd already been killing civilians, right? And we didn't want to invade. That would have led to a lot more deaths. This made sense. We had to do this, okay? And Truman himself didn't doubt it, right? He says he's writing this letter to this journalist. In 1963, he was writing this, and he said, look, you know, I did it to save 125,000 youngsters on the American side and 125,000 on the Japanese side from getting killed. And that's what it did. It saved those lives, right? So even in 1963, he's not questioning it, right? And that was how a lot of Americans felt. Only about 10% in 1945 questioned the bomb. A bunch of Roman Catholic clerics said it was completely immoral to target civilians in this way. 34 Protestant ministers and prominent ones signed a petition to Truman condemning the bomb, but most people are in full support of this thing. All right, this Hersey piece, John Hersey was a journalist who had covered the war in the Pacific. He'd been born in China, spent a good portion of his childhood there, and then he had covered the war in the Pacific. He'd been at Guadalcanal. And he'd seen a lot of nasty things that Japanese soldiers had done, and he didn't have any natural sympathies for the Japanese. But he also wasn't like a racist, and he thought it, you know, he'd been commissioned by the New Yorker magazine to go to Japan and cover the impact of the bomb from kind of a human point of view. And he goes in November of 1945 into Japan, and he interviews like 40 people, and he chooses 6 of them that he's going to build this story around. Okay, and so the first 2 chapters are just the first days of the war, the first day of the bomb going off, right? From the morning of 8:15 in the morning when the bomb explodes, all the way to the end of that day, and it's following these 6 individuals, right? There's the minister, there's the widow with her 3 children, there's the German Jesuit priest, there's the physician, kind of the more traditional Japanese medicinal practice physician. There's the surgeon working for the modern kind of Western Red Cross hospital. And then there's this girl that works in the factory, right? And all of them survive. And I won't make you read the whole piece. You can read as much of it as you want, but you should at least read through to the second chapter on the end of that first day. But it kind of tracks them over the course of that first day, and then over the course of the next few weeks, and then it ends up kind of following up with them about a year later where they're at. And it's really bleak. Like, the whole thing is bleak, like, because it's not just the horror of the actual bomb going off, but of the radiation sickness and everything that follows from it, right? And of course, the contrast is like Hersey says, these six were like among the luckiest people in Hiroshima, and their lives are in shambles a year after the bomb has gone off. Okay, so probably most importantly, it causes Americans to really reconsider, from a moral perspective, the use of the atomic weapon, right? And forces them to really confront, on a human level, the price that Japanese people had to pay for the war ending and for American prosperity increasing in that post-war period. And that's an important thing for Americans to confront, right? And the second thing that it did is it forced Americans to realize, right, really what a horrible and terrible weapon this was, and that this kind of thing could happen to us. And that if our enemies get this weapon and use it against us, we're going to be in the same boat. And so it starts to fuel some of that anxiety that's going to be so definitive of the atomic age, which is the fear of the use of atomic weapons against the United States. Okay, because up until that point, they hadn't really like confronted what the bomb really meant. Okay, so this piece forces them to do it, and it's a sensation, right? It's a huge hit. And even people that are very supportive of the bomb think that this is a good piece and support the piece, and think it's important to sympathize with the victims, because it's important to understand what the consequences of the bomb were, even if you support it. But of course, it also causes a lot of other people to really turn against the use of atomic weapons, right? Like there was this scientist that had been working on the Manhattan Project, been very proud of the work he had done in developing the bomb, who breaks down in tears after reading this thing and says he's just so humiliated that America was the first nation to use this weapon. But it's a huge hit. The first issues of that New Yorker magazine sell out within a couple of days. Within a few more days, they're like collector's items that people are bidding for. So everyone wants to read the story. The New Yorker's allowing other newspapers to print it for free as long as they give the proceeds to the Red Cross. The American Broadcasting Company is reading it aloud over the air. It's published as a book by the end of '46. It's immediately a bestseller all around the world, and it's never gone out of print. So it's a really important piece in terms of really alerting Americans to the moral and really historical consequences of the use of this weapon, the atomic bomb. All right, and it's of course going to fuel a lot of that anxiety that's going to be definitive of that Cold War period, and we're going to start talking about Cold War politics tomorrow.